Today we want to talk about how to build a supply chain for industrial hemp agroprocessing in South Africa. And to help me facilitate that conversation, I have with me the ever-passionate Phivo Artemides on. And we're going to try to cover four primary questions. One, what would it take to get hemp construction materials to really get to the standard to support RDP housing in South Africa? Secondly, in terms of hemp plastics and the alternatives, how do we substitute a large portion of plastic use with hemp-based inputs? Thirdly, when it comes to the actual fabrics used in clothing, what are the considerations that are the additional layers needed to get the quality of the hemp processing in the country to that level? And lastly, how do we make use of hemp grain to start feeding humanity and livestock in the African continent?
Hi Phivo, it's great to have you on today. We're going to be talking about sustainability and building an infrastructure to support hemp. But before we get into all the myriads of topics I want to cover today, why are you so passionate about hemp that it actually compelled you to study this at a university in South Africa?
Hi Jeff, thank you so much for having me on the show. And first and foremost, thanks to everyone who's watching now and for supporting this channel. I think this is a great way and a great avenue to get insight into the cannabis and hemp industry in South Africa. So yeah, as Jeff mentioned, I'm a master's student from the University of Wits, and my energy behind hemp and why I believe it is a climate combative tool is that renewable energy and sustainability have kind of been at the heart of me since I left high school. So my master's was in sustainable energy efficient cities, and within that I studied a research topic on the viability of hemp make energy efficient materials whilst addressing agro-rural socioeconomic opportunities in the Eastern Cape. So I believe hemp is the nexus of a sustainable political climate. It has socioeconomic benefits and it has environmental benefits. And why I'm so attracted to it and why I feel that it has such a power in our country specifically is because each of those avenues need attention, but also hemp is at the center of it. And hemp provides these opportunities of labor absorption, of creating energy efficient products, of providing stable socio-political models that can help hemp be cross-sectoral across all the different departments in our government. And that for me is the major driving force that allows me to see that this is sustainable across all realms, not just environmental and not just this kind of new age sustainability. Like, this is an ancient plant that was used sustainably, and now it's come into a world of industrialization. And the only thing that's been hindering it is this regulatory barrier and this prohibition of it from various other countries, political climates and regulatory climates. So this is a driving force for me to actually make the world more sustainable, make South Africa more sustainable, because we have unique opportunities and we have a unique climate and a unique agricultural base. That's a very large agricultural base that can actually upskill people and train people in a different way and create more nuanced industries where people want to work for it. And it's part of this kind of green wave that we're emerging on now. And I think it's actually something that can provide a raw material for climate combating industries. So to put a long story short, it's something I truly believe in. It's going to make a difference in our country. And I really hope that all of the perspectives from these various social, political, environmental are seen.
Perfect.
By, the regulatory climate.
100%. So, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, hemp used to be, if you look at it, all across the world, hemp was used for its materials in building, in its materials in terms of paper, its qualities, rope. So that's established, and it is this prohibitionism that has put it in the corner, and now it's this revival, and it suits so many of these sustainability objectives that are often raised by international governments. How do we become more sustainable? And today we're going to talk about four verticals of sustainability. One is a building material, which is really what I want to ask you about next. I'm going to also ask you about hemp as a plastics alternative, because hemp plastics, I believe, will deal with a lot of the issues we face around plastics and biodegradables around that space. We're going to talk additionally about it as a fiber. What are the benefits of hemp? I'm busy sweating right here in my cotton shirt. on a hot day in Africa.
I'm wearing a hemp shirt.
Exactly.
I'm
So
not
that's the
sweating at
thing.
all.
You're not sweating. So that's a perfect illustration of, we have these cotton shirts on. It's a hot day in Africa. Hemp's so much better for that application. And we're also going to talk about something really passionate I'm here for is food. The sustainability, the benefits of hemp as a food additive, not just for humans, but for livestock. So we're going to dig into all four of those. So before we dig into that and some of the challenges to actually building a hemp industry right at the end, let's talk about RDP housing, sustainable housing, carbon neutral, buildings. Tell me a bit about hemp's potential as a building material in the whole global industry, but how we can use it in South Africa as well for building.
So I think to touch on that point, the unique advantage in South Africa is we've earmarked a lot of areas in our IDPs and SDPs that's for social housing. And we need a lot of housing close to economic agglomerated areas because of our apartheid history of spatial segregation. So bringing in a lot of energy efficient materials into the urban area is what's needed. So hemp provides this raw material where you use the hurd, which is the inner woody part of the hemp. And that goes through a process of industrialization through a decortication facility. And by getting those fine hurds, able to actually use that with a lime composite and with water to make these hempcrete bricks that we can use as structural integrity bricks. One thing that hemp doesn't have, it doesn't have the ability to hold up and have the kind of engineering feat as bricks and all these other conventional materials. What it offers is multiple different ways of creating an energy efficient household, right? Which is what the RDP houses needed in South Africa. So it can provide insulation, it can provide sub-slab insulation, and it can provide wall bearings. So if we look at hempcrete, for example, there's multiple things about it that allow it to be a carbon neutral product. And this is the carbon sequestration that happens on the farm site. And that's through the absorption of carbon. So it can absorb from anywhere between 8 to 16 tons per hectare. Okay, and this is dependent on the strain variation and various other things as well. As it's used throughout the industrial process, it uses a bit of carbon. When it's in its final stage, it actually carbonates and absorbs carbon again and releases oxygen. And this is because of it being a cellulose-based material. And when it's in that final stage, there's two aspects to look at it from. One is its energy performance. So that's looking at how it compares to the red clay bricks that we use here. Because in South Africa, we need to keep the heat out because it's very hot. And this isn't the same as in Europe and the north, because we need to keep the heat out and we need to not let the heat in. So this is transposed into your R value and your U value in a building material. Your R value is your resistance value, and that will resist heat transfer. And your U value is your transmission value, and that won't allow any heat in. So we need to keep those two variables in our building materials high. So the challenge now with that in RDP is we need to get these materials and raw anatomical parts accredited by our Standards Bureau. And that needs to come from local farmers and not imported farmers so that we can provide for this absorption on cultivation sites in the value chain. So we can enable farmers with the right agronomic practices to grow good herd or grow a good dual purpose crop. And then looking at it in an RDP fashion, we need to package hemp with government vehicles that have strategically allocated policy protocols to develop energy efficient households. And that's in the form of social housing, and all these developments coming up in the Gauteng region are all closer to urban areas, and it places a lot of challenges on our electricity demand and all these things. And having these self-regulated, almost passively designed households using hemp optimizes the amount of natural light, optimizes the temperature inside, and it has all these other great benefits like being antibacterial, being hydroscopic, being fire resistant, being sound resistant. So it has very good acoustics and very good thermal properties with the R and the U value. So it isn't the panacea for building materials, but it provides an opportunity to integrate a carbon neutral raw material into this urban environment and into the built environment. And I think that the RDP houses is a very good standpoint in that regard.
No, fully. And I mean, I'd love to see that. And I mean, there's so much we can say about building materials and these aspects, and we might have these future discussions on specific verticals. When you mentioned obviously sustainability and the ESCOM factor, I was even thinking of hemp being used in biocomposites for batteries, where we've seen the studies in terms of hemp as part of battery development. And there's so much potential. But let's stick to the four main topics, and let's jump from here to another passionate point, which is plastics. I mean, everyone out there knows. I mean, I also don't shop and buy plastics. I try to always bring my own materials in to shop with. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to cut down on plastics. And hemp plastics, how do you see the development in the space? It is one where there's going to be drawbacks and there's going to be wins, but increasingly with a push towards sustainable, polymers. Tell me about your view on hemp plastics and its integration into society.
So yeah, there's a lot of trouble with these petroleum-based plastics we have right now. It's based on the fact that their recyclability is actually in a much longer time span.
Yeah.
So the biodegradability, excuse me. So that means that if we deposit them into landfills, they don't get degraded, and we're trying to use a bunch of bacteria and fungi to fast track that process. But what hemp offers, it has multiple angles on the biocomposites where it can form as being a plastic substitute. So that would be a cellulose-based polymer. They would use a different matrix of integrating it. So it still would have some petroleum base to allow for that. But its biodegradability would be increased. I mean, would be decreased. So its ability to biodegrade would be increased. The time span of biodegradability would be decreased.
Yeah.
And that's because of it using natural plant additives. Another aspect where it gets really interesting is in the nanocellulose crystallization. And that can be used in a lot of pharmaceutical products. It's like the gel between caps, and it can be used as the Tupperware for the capsules per se. And that allows for something that could close the loop and create something that can be a circular economy and bioeconomy. And that's because we're using a product that's eco-compatible, has environmental credentials on site, and also is able to kind of fast track this emergence against a very resource intensive industry being plastic. So it's like a very good substitute to kind of allow for a more balanced approach. So one thing that is important about it being used as a biocomposite is that it has a much lower density, and it has a lot of high strength to mass ratio. So that allows for it to be used in different procedures. So that can be used in different applications, and it allows for different fiber integrations.
Okay.
So a certain spectrum to monitor it is called this Young modulus spectrum, which measures the ability to change under tension. So that's like a certain, trigger point for people when it's about how it performs in its ability. So those types of matrices and how it mixes and stuff is still an area where being considered a biodegradable product needs to be refined more in how it mixes with these
awesome.
other petroleum additives.
No, 100%. It's about reducing the amount of petroleum in the products while giving it that exact biodegradable profile that's suitable for its use. Now, I want to talk about it as a fiber. You can see I'm hot, warm day here in South Africa. As a fiber, what are the benefits of it versus cotton? Let's talk about its use in textiles. We should probably also elaborate on maybe some additional work that needs to be done it's not easy to get to a textile grade hemp fiber. Take me through that process if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a multi-pronged approach that needs to be seen, and it needs to be seen all throughout the value chain. What's happening on farm level, what's happening in the processing facility and the manufacturing facility, the decortication plant, and then what's happening on the retail side and who's there to absorb that demand. So the main thing is feeding the farmers that's within your co-op or a big strategic farm in close proximity to the processing center with very good agronomic practices that have the right sowing density, have the right availability of site for storage, and are able to grow crops that are of high quality. And then using that data from each farm, you can basically refine it through an algorithm, a machine learning algorithm that'll show each farm what it needs to refine its processing on. So farm A would perform really well because it used this agronomic practice. Therefore, farm B didn't. So it needs to do a bit of what Farm A did. And that allows for the same quality of fiber entering the decortication plant. And when it's in that decortication plant...
So let me stop you there. I'm going to ask you a question. What is a decortication plant? I know, but for the audience who's heard this 3 or 4 times, tell us exactly what a decorticator does.
Yeah. The decorticator is something that will take raw biomass and separate the anatomical parts based on what their target product would be. So it would take a raw biomass of a hemp plant, like for example, it'll take a whole hemp tree, it'll push it through a system where it'll separate the epidermis from the herd, and the epidermis being the skin of the plant. And then that herd will be used and chopped up to make different types of compositions. And then you get dust as well. So and you also get grain. So basically, it'll separate each anatomical part so that it's able to be used in a different product. So you'll use grain for either feed or food. You'll use the epidermis for composites and textiles, and then you use the herd for building materials, and the dust can be used in different applications. So what's interesting about the epidermis is that it has a primary and secondary fiber. And the primary fiber is longer, and that's what's actually used to make it more softer when you remove the lignin and the pectin. And that's done when you do a process of hydrolysis. And you can do various things like steam explosion or chemical explosion. But the steam explosion proves to be the most efficient at this stage. But one thing on the back end of the word efficiency that I use now is that our efficiency of technology make these products where they need to be for cottonized factories so it can substitute them is where this kind of impact needs to be made by government or by private sector. Because a lot of what happens is there'll be, in the emergence of hemp coming online on the farm level, people will grow a lot of biomass and look to get it processed. These processing sites will be few and far between with the capacity that's needed. And they also won't be in proximity, and transporting hemp at a large volume with a low density is very costly. So, yeah. I mean, using hemp as a basic apparel, let's say, right? It can be used in various sport, leisure. We use as different functional things like your woven textiles, your ropes, bags, and going to the shirts and the apparel. Like one thing that I'll notice right now, experientially as well as theoretically, is that I don't sweat. There's no hydroscopicity, but that's because of its breathability as well. It's breathable. It doesn't allow me to sweat. It's also very, very strong. So you wear it in and you don't really wear it out. So you actually put it on and it'll feel a little bit partially rigid, but after a while, it's this soft, almost cotton-like feel. And it also has UV protection. So going out into the sun, it won't transmit as well through your material. And it also didn't use any pesticides or any treatment for it. So it's healthy for your skin, and your skin is your biggest organ on your body. And that's one way of keeping your immune system strong through your skin. So hemp provides this realistic, tangible thing that you can use in your everyday that increases the sustainability of the textile industry, as well as improving your quality of life experientially.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump in here with another question, because often people classify all of this as like hemp's amazing for everything. And it is really, but there's nuance to it. And we want to talk to the nuance, because like when we talk about clothing, like that level of processing is very refined in terms of the value chain. And before we talk about grain and its useful feed, let's deal with the challenge of really getting a sustainable value chain built, because a lot of the initial activities in Africa will be focused on a lot of these raw industrial applications. And then as the processing plants, the decortication facilities, and all the associated tertiary processing improves and develops, we will start to get to a point where we're able to produce, like you said, is that epidermis being split that then gives you that really appropriate fiber. And hemp is a hollow fiber, correct?
Yes, it's a hollow fiber.
So just a point for the audience, that's what gives it a lot of its beneficial properties. So talk to me about, those stages. What do you see as practical in terms of rollouts? I don't want to say there's an unlimited budget, but where is the money going to be spent first? And I know this is, where's the money probably going to go if we want to get to a textile industry that, because that's very consumer facing. That's what you got to almost get used to it. Can you talk to that a bit before we come to grain? Because I think a lot of our our industry would be interested in understanding those distinctions in terms of the different, if I had to spend on decortication and then I had to spend on that, what is most practical and where does government step in and where does big ag step in terms of building because we don't want to have hemp farmers growing tons and tons and tons of biomass that rots like it did after the Farm Bill in the US. And we're not going to talk about extraction for medicinal products or for supplement products, but just we want to see biomass being utilized. Talk to me about the type of infrastructure and the timelines for that we should really focus on to build it.
So to target where investment needs to be made, it's hard to say because you need hemp farms.
Yeah.
You also need processing farms, and you need the demand side. And the one thing that I think is being a slow emergence in South Africa is also awareness from the consumer, demand from the consumer for a hemp product, because people see it and they immediately place it in the same pool as its sister, being marijuana. And it is the same plant, the single plant theory, but it's not that, and it was grouped in. So now changing that stigma around it. So looking at where primary points of incision needs to be for major players in the industry would be on the processing side.
Yeah.
The processing side is going to be the turnkey that can feed the farmers the information that's required to grow great textile products and feed reputable farmers that have arable land, that have done soil tests, that are in good climatic areas, that have good land prep, have a history of farming, and then use their growth cycles to be able to breed the climate adapted genetics and cultivars they can keep rolling out in successive seasons. So you would do a breeding site, then you would use that for the next 3 seasons so that your genetics will stay the same. So making sure that on site level and on farm level, you have the adequate farm related data. People can grow sufficient high quality textiles, high quality hemp. It has very long and fibrous stems. Yeah. And then being able to have on the processing side, a sufficient agro-processing facility is in a very strategic location regionally. And something that I believe is the key factor in South Africa is actually having mobile multifunctional processing units in different agri-regions. And the agri-park model in the Eastern Cape is a perfectly beautiful farming model that we can simply put on as a vehicle to kind of be able to facilitate the upgrading of that and the reignition of that. And that's having farms in close location to processing facilities, which are in close locations to market enterprises. So for me, it's primarily ensuring that the processing technology can have enough tonnage per annum to be able to absorb a large amount of biomass, but also that's be able to scale the biomass based on its own integrity. So not treating everything as super high quality fiber. Processing facility that will know if the fiber is grade C, for example, and then know if the fiber is grade B and A, and process it in a way that it optimizes the integrity of each grading.
Yeah.
Because if we say all hemp is the same and we process it the same, I have a feeling that the output is gonna be these kind of substandard products that we want and substandard processed materials, and that's gonna lead into different problems when it's trying to cottonize hemp fiber. Facilities come out and they specialize in cottonizing hemp fiber, particularly, and then these other processing facilities further down the chain. That's where I believe the impact needs to be, is on ensuring that there is a adequately sufficient and capacitated processing facility, a decortication plant, as well as efficient non-resource intensive farming and makes high quality hemp fiber. And having that link so succinct and so realistic and strategic that they're benefiting and mutually benefiting off one another, it feeds the market. And it feeds these various avenues of creating woven textiles or creating whatever types of avenues
awesome.
For product development.
Well, you know what? I agree with that. And it's good to see the passion coming through on these topics because, it's one way we've got to really identify the distinctions in grading. I know we'll probably have more discussions in the future about specifically talking about grading, talking about all these aspects of the agro-processing. You did say about feeding the market, so I'm going to talk about feeding the people. Let's talk about the aspect of grain. Bring me to, we've talked about it as a building material. We've talked about it as a substitute to cut down on plastics. We've talked about it now in terms of the different tiers and SKUs in terms of textile products, rope products, and other fiber-related products, and its associated substitutes, like whether that's going into dashboards, into BMWs, in the Port Elizabeth region. Like, let's talk about it as a food additive, because I think when people think of it as a food additive, they start to now really destigmatize its consumption, because now we're talking about consumption. Talk to me about the value of hemp grain.
So hemp grain is a highly valuable plant, especially as it is a nut, and it's also on the rise of the vegetarian diet. So the vegetarian diet worldwide is increasing per annum, and that allows for a lot of what we term superfoods to be a lot more accessible to that market, and a lot more accessible just independently. So one thing that hemp is very good at, if you look at the grain version, is it can be separated into two categories, as feed and as food. I think focusing first on food and human consumption, hemp seeds have a particular protein called edestin, which is a very high protein and allows for, I think it was metabolism and antibodies. So that increases the basically nutritional value, but it has over, and if you look at it independently, it has over 538 like chemical constituents, being whether it be the cannabinoids, terpenes, hydrocarbons, all these flavonoids, and then down into that. So just primarily as a plant, it's hyper nutritional. But also on the grain side, and staying with the food side, it definitely has an advantage in having amino acids. And these amino acids basically allow for a lot of uptake of fatty acids in our brain. And that's actually good for baby consumption, because baby consumption needs that omegas. And they need that omegas to take up a lot of the micronutrients in our brain. So yeah, it has a lot of different processes as well in the food side. It can be used as the superfood for patties. So it can be used as a protein. Hemp-based protein. I think the only company that's now is in New Zealand that's making a hemp-based protein. And yeah, it allows for a lot of the different types of, so then looking at hemp seed oil, it has, I think, 80% polyunsaturated fats. And of those, it has omega-6 and omega-3. And those omegas is what allows for that nutritional value. And it can make hemp hearts, you can make hulled hemp, and basically throughout the whole consumption market of edible consumption, you can allow it to enter in at different stages as hemp protein shakes, as hemp-based foods, as simple hemp hulled seeds or hemp or crushed seeds. So it offers these different avenues that feed into different target markets. Like if people are just using it to add on to salads, if people are using it as their base protein, it has a lot of this potential to be amplified in the consumption market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to highlight something, because I know we engage often between, DALRAD, the Department of Agriculture, as well as with the Department of Health, the Directorate of Food Control, and the Department of Health, with, SAPRA separate. I mean, there is obviously this discussion or this concern that's raised around, metals, aggregation, but understand that if there's sustainable crop, the approach, if it's done correctly, there's no reason you can't be subsidizing food, for consumption. So there's really rules to it. The industrial applications probably a little less stringent, but we've got to start looking at the end use of what we're doing, what we want to get out of hemp, and regulate the end use appropriately without trying to regulate everything from the right in the beginning. The thing is, industry regulation is a result of industry practice. And unfortunately, what we see is too much over-regulation before there's even an industry. And I have an issue when it comes to over-regulation of a sector before the sector's actually created a problem. Because regulation results usually as a net result of exploitive behaviors within the industry. Now, it's good to be proactive and set proactive legislation, but it's got to be then accommodating to build an industry. So this will always bring me back to why we had this discussion about sustainable value chain. And it brings me to my next point. Let's address the actual challenges. Firstly, the challenge is, like you said, there's 3 layers to it. There's the farmer, the processor, and the consumer. Like, how big is the consumption market Well, that requires education. It will grow because everywhere in the world we've seen the growth of hemp-related and cannabis-related products. So that will improve. If we keep importing products related to hemp, that's just foolish, right? That's an opportunity that's missed by government. Next thing is, how do we build the infrastructure, the processing, the agro-processing? Well, we're probably going to need some support from big ag and from government, because the farming side is probably easiest, because people can say, okay, great, I can grow this. I've got the land. Africa, South Africa, we have the land. We've got the climates, so we have the ability to grow it. That's easy, and the consumer is increasingly becoming informed, so that's easy as well. So somewhere in the middle, to really facilitate this, we need some kind of big ag, some kind of government involvement, and that's kind of where I keep pushing stakeholders is, don't over-regulate the farmer, don't over-regulate the end user, because we regulate all those things really well, but we never talk about the infrastructure in the middle. And if you're going to regulate, maybe use the aggregators or the infrastructure to enforce the testing, to enforce the regulation. And I think that's kind of where we're going. And I mean, we're probably going to agree on this, and I'd like to hear your opinion on, the first concern is the 0.2% THC in terms of a definition for low THC cannabis or hemp. There are many jurisdictions. Czech Republic, Switzerland, Malawi, all at 1%. In Colombia, they split psychoactive and non-psychoactive licenses also by 1%. Italy is at 0.6%. We saw the amendment by the Common Agricultural Policy to 0.3% for rebate for farmers in Europe. So the 0.2 in Europe is also 0.3. The Farm Bill put a 0.3 forward. Why are we even considering 0.2? Now, I know that that's been put into writing. Nothing's ever fixed on a piece of paper, so we can change it. But what are the benefits, and why is 0.2? Let's talk about it. Why is it not practical for Africa? Tell me, just from your view, in your opinion, from your research, from being at university, why should we be looking at least 1% or maybe a 0.6 like Italy? What is your feeling on this?
It's a very good point to raise fundamentally, because if we have processing capacity and we don't have farmers because their crops have gone over the regulatory boundary, the industry's at a halt. And if our genetics don't perform, the industry's at a halt. So I think something we can agree on is that this THC burden that the hemp plant is experiencing is non-scientific. It's purely based on this value, this arbitrary value that was set forth based on global best practices. South Africa defining what they classified as is almost something that will need to be addressed in the short term. So for me, something that I would like to express is that this THC burden is something that will halt the industry, and it will limit the amount of people entering the industry, because in South Africa, I mean, with the heat and with the climate and with the UV spectrum, we have a higher chance of increasing these cannabinoids. And, there's research written, and I'll put it in the comments after this, about how cannabinoids formed in our plant, in the hemp plant. And it was based on the fact that it had to protect itself from high UV spectrum and protect itself from plants. So these two theories are kind of they merge at the same time in this research paper. So it actually is a fundamental protection from high UV. And South Africa, in our climate, we have a high UV spectrum, and we have like a very long photo period in some stages, and that just causes this adaptation of the plant, this natural adaptation to defend itself. And genetics, even though there are certain chemotypes that are set in stone, they do fundamentally have these alleles in their gene pool that will mutate for adaptation. So for me, adaptation needs to come from us, from the understanding that this plant won't be used to be smoked. This brick won't be burnt down to be smoked. Like, those fundamental stigmas associated with it are what's hindering it. So I think following these practices that are now pushing the THC up allow more market entrants to come, which will increase the amount of sustainability at cultivation level, of people being able to grow and being able to register genetics and so on. Because I think for now we only have 3 registered genetics: the Nova Scora, the Polti, and the Futura 77. And I think there was one with the Fedora. And they were from Yugoslavia and then from France. So it's like, and the ones from Hungary. So we are in need in our country right now with hemp seeds, which will come online and get registered. They need to be interested in the fact that if the THC goes to 1%, that is within the regulation. So if it goes over 0.3 by a certain 0.1%, it can be managed by the manufacturer and not by the farmer. So it's something that can be dealt with and taken out and proven after manufacturing if you test it, for example, so that even if these crops turn hot, you can still use them in some function, even if it's a low-grade function like woven textiles made by women empowerment programs in the Eastern Cape. So using something to basically absorb something to address a certain challenge in our country, like employment.
Yeah.
But using hemp as that and not letting hemp be over-regulated just leads to, not the right practices being set forth sustainably.
Exactly. So, I mean, you speak about that, and I agree. Like, we don't over-regulate an industry that doesn't exist. Like, that's just economic policy. Like, in a country where we need jobs and job creation, that's the way we got to do it. Like, so for me, here's the point, and I love it. Let anyone who wants to jump into the comments, I know you mentioned as well, give us reference material. Like, jump in there with, like, about the UV spectrum, about the photo period, daylights. Let's give the science aggregation and opportunity so stakeholders who watch this, and I try to send it as broadly as I can actually really get informed about policy, because policy is going to shape the space. And I'm so passionate about having you on because there's so much more to talk about. And I know I tend to focus heavily on medical cannabis, so I'm definitely one who's heavily involved in regulation. But I do see the pitfalls of regulation firsthand from being in a regulated industry as almost a barrier to entry. And we need to open up these opportunities. So, Phivo, I just want to say thank you so much for making time available. We're going to be jumping into more discussions. I know we did about good 35 minutes plus here. So I'm excited for having you back on, talking about these different verticals. In the comments, if you'd like to see a certain topic covered, discussed, add that to it so we can cover it. For me, this is a passion, seeing botanical medicine, seeing botanical input materials. Like, hemp has to come back. It is coming back into main agricultural practices. I saw that hemp was the 5th most successful commercial crop last year in the United States, which is saying a lot in terms of to go to from almost nowhere to the 5th largest commercial crop. That's a big statement. We don't want to get it wrong in South Africa. In fact, we want to learn from every jurisdiction and get it right. I'm not seeing us getting it right from the get-go. I know that there's the expertise. We've seen the work of Tony Budden. There are lots of people who have good advice that is filtering through. I do think this will be the year that government gets it and enables the industry. And we saw the SONA discussion as well not so long ago regarding this. So I just want to say thank you so much, Phivo. Appreciate having you on, and I'm looking forward to our future discussions.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks, world, for listening. And yeah, really looking forward to discussing anything in the comments. But thanks, Jess, for the awesome platform. This is another avenue which provides real-time data to people in South Africa and in the world about what's going on in the hemp industry. So thanks so much for having me. And yeah, looking forward to the future.
Awesome. Chat soon again.